Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa Klein and I'm the current Rural Outreach Coordinator with Project Response. I have a PowerPoint made up that should be linked somewhere in your email or Blackboard. In case just sitting down and listening for about an hour doesn't really work for you, feel free to read ahead or follow along, have something other than my voice. But that is why I'll be looking to the side every once in a while. I'll try to target most of what I'm saying toward you in the camera, but this is a little bit last minute for me, so I'll just be looking to the PowerPoint for talking points. I'm going to try not to read everything directly to you. So the first slide is just the opening slide, saying the title, as I had mentioned, our agency name, my name, and position. If you go to the second slide, it is titled, What is Project Response? So what we are is an agency that works with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. We are a nonprofit. We offer free support and advocacy. We serve the 5 most southeast counties in Nebraska, which are Nemaha, Johnson, Otoe, Pawnee, and Richardson. We're also directed by a volunteer board of local citizens, and we are comprised staff-wise of advocates and volunteers in our area because we are a nonprofit. So slide 3 touches on our services, which I always like to kind of start with, give you an idea of what we do before we go into everything that makes up the work we participate in. So on this slide, I separated to what we do that is available to all in the community and what of our services are solely available to survivors. So available to all in the community. First thing is safety planning. You don't necessarily have to be a survivor of domestic or sexual violence to need safety planning, especially if you're just kind of trying to prepare and educate yourself for the future. We also offer protection order assistance. So this goes for domestic violence protection orders, sexual violence protection orders, and harassment protection orders. A lot of people don't know that this isn't just restricted to survivors. We've had community members come in before due to other community members harassing them and following them and just generally making them feel unsafe through different actions, such as like driving around their house consistently, sending threatening messages that didn't fall under sexual violence or domestic violence. So we did a harassment protection order for this gal, and yeah, she was not a survivor, to my knowledge, of sexual violence or domestic violence, but we can still offer that assistance. We also operate a food pantry. Food pantry is available to everyone in those 5 counties once every month. You can come back monthly, and the size that you're permitted to take from the food pantry is based on household. So for like 3-family household, I want to say it's 2 bags, and for a 1-person household, it's 1, and it just goes up proportionately. We also offer referrals. So if someone comes to us and we can't help them with something, we're always going to refer them. We're never going to say, sorry, you're out of luck. If someone comes to us for financial assistance, well, our financial funds are mostly restricted to survivors that are fleeing domestic or sexual violence. And so if someone would come to us for financial assistance and that didn't cover them, we would direct them to SENCA or maybe someone else that could possibly offer that financial assistance, like the Ministerial Association at times. And just anything else that might not be covered under our services or our funds and grants, we refer out if we can't help. Clothing and personal care item assistance. So once every 3 months, everyone can come in, well, everyone in the 5 counties can come in for a clothing voucher, and this clothing voucher is good at our neighborhood closet in Auburn. And this clothing voucher is also proportionate based on household size. They can also come in for personal care items, and these are things that sometimes aren't covered under other like assistance programs. So you could get like laundry detergent, trash bags, and things like that, in addition to just like toiletries and other hygiene products. And then, I'm sorry, I need a drink. And then the last thing available to everyone in the community is community education and outreach. So we have a sexual assault advocate who currently goes into different schools in our 5 counties, and she educates teenagers around middle school and high school about healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, how to develop all of those. And then we also just do trainings around the area. So if anyone were to ask us to come in and speak, like I've given trainings on domestic violence 101, sexual trauma in relation to the youth, human trafficking. Before all of this happening in our world currently happened, I also had set up a child trafficking training that I was going to give in April. That's now been moved. And then just anything that pertains to our services of domestic or sexual violence, we will go train on, we will go speak on. Any awareness activity we can figure out, we will do. Anytime anyone asks us to speak somewhere, we're pretty much going to go there. Just any excuse to educate the community and do prevention work. So then moving on from that piece, looking at services that are available to survivors only, we offer emergency shelter, and this at times can be what seems most important, or maybe I shouldn't put it that way, but most pertinent to survivors. So we have a 24-hour crisis hotline that we run, and if someone were to call us 3 in the morning saying that their spouse and them just got into a physical altercation and they needed somewhere to stay, they needed to get away, we would take them into our emergency shelter. We have an agreement with most motels in the area, and so we can house people there, and it's still completely confidential. We do all of the speaking with the motel staff, and we put it under our names, and we pick up the key, and we deliver it to our client, which is what we call our survivors, and get them into safety for the night. This is a short-term shelter. It's typically a week or 2 weeks max. We don't unfortunately have a long-term shelter just due to funds and other resources, but the short-term is a really big resource for us, and it helps us work on assistance locating safe and permanent housing. A lot of times people who are fleeing these types of relationships don't have anywhere to go immediately. They may have a lot of friends in common with their abuser, or they may kind of share the same family. So if you've been married for a long time, or you've been together for a long time even, you see a lot of times that person's family kind of becomes yours, and you just need somewhere completely separate and I guess anonymous to stay. You don't have to worry about family members communicating or friends communicating and so on. We also offer transportation. This is not to say we are an Uber. Transportation is in if a client needs to get to a hospital for a SANE exam, and a SANE exam is a sexual assault exam, what you would have done afterwards, and they didn't have any transportation, we would take them to that exam, even if it were in Lincoln or Omaha. We've done that quite a few times. Well, I shouldn't say quite a few, but whenever it's been needed, we have offered that. And this also goes over like protection order hearings and anything to do with the trauma that they've endured. If transportation is needed and they cannot supply it themselves, we will supply it for them. We also offer crisis counseling, which is kind of just an overlap and mixture of everything else I've been discussing as our services and what I will discuss. Support groups are also offered. We don't have any formed currently, but if anyone were to express the need for one, we would offer that. Right now, we just haven't had any interest in any, simply because we're a rural community and it's not very anonymous. But if a client if they wanted that service but they didn't want it locally, we also, again, refer out, so we would know ones in Lincoln to send them to. I've mentioned the 24/7 crisis hotline, meaning, again, like we get a call 3 in the morning, whatever, we still have an advocate that will speak to that survivor. We have office hours, yes, but that's just when we're in office. Our crisis hotline is always 24/7. We also offer legal and medical advocacy. So if a survivor had any questions pertaining to the legal or medical side of things, as long as it still was related to the trauma that they endured and what we specialize in, we would be able to advocate for them and to offer some answers to a certain degree. We are not legal or medical experts. We just know a bit about the field that we primarily work in. At some certain point, we would, again, have to refer out. You're possibly going to need actual legal aid, or someone who is an expert in the medical field to answer certain questions. But we can accompany people to hospitals and courtrooms and so on. And we can offer limited information. We never offer legal or medical advice, though. That is outside of our realm. And then also, yes, assistance locating safe and permanent housing. So most survivors, like I said, they don't have a place to go to. Sometimes, we're that middle ground, a shelter that they need, or sometimes we offer maybe financial aid to help get them into a new house, simply because sometimes one person in the relationship has complete control over all of the finances, or maybe they have the car and just certain things that make it harder for them to achieve, this new housing. So we offer assistance when locating that. Oh, and yes, down in the right corner, I put that in there. I always forget to say it unless I put it in and I notice it last minute, like now. So all of our services are free and confidential. Absolutely everything is free to everyone. Even our financial assistance, we never ask for that to be paid back. And then everything is confidential. Even our food pantry, if you're not a survivor and you come in for that, we're never going to mention that you were in here looking for some bags of food. We simply keep everything confidential. So if I were to see someone I've helped before out on the street in the public, just walking down the sidewalk, I would not approach them. I would speak with them if they approached me, but I would not bring up anything work-related unless they first brought that up, and just so on. It might be breaking confidentiality if I were to do any of that, so we avoid it all very strongly. And then another thing, just to emphasize how confidential we are. So if, say, some lady were to come in her late teens or early 20s, and she wanted help with some of our services, any of them, just pick one, it does not matter, and she were to bring her mom in with her just to make her feel more comfortable. If her mom were to call back the next day just asking some questions over like what we spoke on, or asking for an update like, hey, did my daughter ever get an answer on this, and so on, even though I know she was there in the room with us and I know she knows that her daughter is using our services, I would tell her that I can neither confirm nor deny working with her daughter, just simply because it might be breaking confidentiality, and it would be. Yes, she knows all of this information, but we're always going to treat things with the utmost caution. I'm going to see what slide this brings me to. I've been zoomed in, so on slide 4, we go into what types of cases that we deal with. So our survivors, we've helped survivors of stalking, harassment, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual trauma, and incest. So stalking is actually more common than some people think. Typically, that's an underlying piece of almost all of the other issues our survivors face. Harassment, like I've said before, domestic violence, sexual trauma I put in as kind of an overlap because sometimes it's sexual violence, sometimes it's sex trafficking. Just like with human trafficking, that one's kind of broad. I left it broad because we would work with like survivors of sex or labor trafficking. And then incest I separated from sexual trauma just because, again, it seemed, well, not incest, but sexual trauma seemed so broad that I thought it was worth putting in as its own little piece. So slide 5 is just a quick overview. What is domestic violence? So by definition, domestic violence is violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner. So there's some, I want to say, unhealthy or toxic behaviors you may see in relationships that may seem abusive, or maybe you're like, well, it's not quite abusive enough, like extreme jealousy might not seem outright abusive to some people. But if any of a person's actions or words are abusive to control the way someone acts, feels, or thinks, that's when we actually consider it abusive. So that's kind of the question to ask yourself when you're trying to tell, is this behavior simply unhealthy and toxic, or is it actually abusive? Well, if this behavior is being used to control the way a person thinks, acts, or feels, then it is abusive. So, and then I put to the side this little diagram or chart, just whatever you want to call it, just to show all of the different sides of domestic violence. A lot of people think it's just, physical. They look past, there's emotional abuse in addition to the physical abuse. It could be sexual abuse, psychological abuse, and even economical abuse. If one person in the relationship denies access to the finances or won't let the other individual have a job, or maybe they have like an allowance and they just get money from the account and they don't have like access to a card or anything more to the account than the other individual would want, that can be economic abuse. It's very isolating, keeps them in, so on. So, sorry, I have to keep leaning over. My laptop away from my desktop is hiding the slide numbers. Okay, so slide 6. 6, 7, and 8 get into harmful behaviors, just because, again, some people overlook the non-physical side of domestic violence. And I'm sorry about my voice. I swear I'm not sick. I've just been having a hard time with allergies. So the first category of harmful behaviors is semi-physical. So I put semi-physical away from the rest of the physical because these are behaviors that are pretty physical and harmful, but because they are not outright physical and in your face, they are sometimes overlooked as being abusive. So this can include damaging or destroying property. We have had clients who have looked on their phones a little bit too long, and their significant other found it to be worrying, thinking that they were cheating on them or something. And then we've also just had one client's, I can't remember if it was husband or boyfriend, but their male partner had decided she had made a Facebook specifically to try to find someone to cheat on him with, and he destroyed her phone. Well, then some people say, well, this isn't abusive. There was no physical harm against her. Well, it was against her property, and destroying property is also considered an intimidation tactic, which can be abusive and traumatizing. Throwing objects, animal abuse, again, that can be used as a form of intimidation and also just it's abuse against another life form. Grabbing, sometimes people don't consider grabbing abusive enough. Shaking and spitting. Harmful behaviors emotionally on slide 7. This would include degrading or putting a partner down, threatening to harm, and I keep threatening to harm pretty open, not as just necessarily threatening to harm the other individual in the relationship, but another thing we've been seeing more and more is threatening to harm oneself. So that's if you leave me, I'll kill myself. If you do this, I'll hurt myself, and so on. It's used to guilt trip someone into staying in a relationship. Criticizing feelings, invalidating them, again using intimidation, which can include a physical or semi-physical aspect, and gaslighting. So gaslighting is something we're seeing more and more. Your age group might be familiar with it. Basically what it is making a victim feel as though whatever they are experiencing is either their fault or they are, we'll say, crazy for perceiving it the way that they are. So this could be, you make me act like this, you just make me crazy, I can't control myself with how you act, no one will believe you is sometimes what we see in there. I'm trying to think of other examples, but I think you probably know where I'm going with this. And we have other things to focus on, so I shouldn't get too hung up on it. Slide 8. So other harmful behaviors can be isolating. This one sometimes gets left out, but it's a really important piece in domestic violence because it can be the reason why some individuals do not seek help or why they feel that they cannot receive help or pursue it. So isolating can be controlling money and other resources. If someone controls money, it's more difficult for the other individual to leave the relationship. If someone controls, the vehicle that they have in their household, then they can control if that person possibly leaves the relationship or how easy it is for that person to leave the relationship. Controlling who the partner can and can't talk to, controlling where the partner can or can't go, and needing to know their location at all times. Sometimes people perceive being jealous as a cute little thing, and I'm not saying jealous is an abusive behavior. It's very common and human to feel jealousy. I am a very jealous girlfriend when I'm in relationships. The point of it being included in all these pieces is how you take your jealousy and how you act with your jealousy. If you're feeling jealous, that is perfectly fine. That is healthy. But if because of your jealousy, you are not allowing your partner to interact with anyone of the gender that they like, or you're using it to control, again, the way they feel, act, or think, that's where the problem comes in. So, slide 9 is about power imbalance. Power imbalance is a big part of all abusive relationships. Power imbalance is why it is sometimes, I don't want to say it, but a little easier to abuse, or something that can facilitate abuse. So power imbalance can be, with work supervisors, caregivers of children, the disabled, or elderly. So power imbalance is a huge, huge thing in the dynamic of abusive relationships, because with a power imbalance, so the victim in these situations, they may not understand the exploitation they are experiencing due to cognitive limitations. And this is typically what you see again if you are the caregiver of children disabled or elderly. And then also limited mobility, impaired mentality, and limited communication skills can also kind of show a power imbalance. So with the domestic violence side, a lot of times this will be like a relationship between someone who's grown up in our rural area and then someone who maybe immigrated into the United States and now has a communication barrier. So maybe they rely on the other person, their partner, to do a bit of the communicating, or their partner might actually hold on to their papers and documents. That is a issue that we've seen before. Sorry, trying to find where I am. So this power imbalance can make for difficult prosecution, especially when it comes to, again, caregivers of children disabled or elderly. It also makes it less likely, well, it being the abuse, less likely to be reported. And I kind of just put a little statistic in the bottom to emphasize why this power imbalance is such a problem. And that's more than 90% of people with developmental disabilities will likely experience sexual abuse at some point in their lives. I thought this was a big point to put in because what it says here is basically that if you have a developmental oh my goodness, today I spilled my coffee on my feet before coming here to film this, so that kind of tells you everything you need to know. If you have a developmental disability, you are almost guaranteed to experience sexual abuse. So again, I know we're not necessarily focusing on sexual abuse or anything like that, but this speaks to the power imbalance that really takes root in almost all violent relationships. So I also included the power and control wheel. This touches on all of the, the font's really small, I know. Feel free when you open up the PowerPoint to go into editing and blow it up so you can read it. But this emphasizes the different sides of abuse again, especially in domestic violence relationships. So that could be using coercion and threats, using intimidation, emotional abuse, economic abuse, using male privileges in there. We're not saying that women cannot be abusers. We are just saying that that is a big piece of what we see. A lot of domestic violence takes root in sexist views. And then also, again, using isolation, which can be what keeps them from leaving or pursuing help. I need another drink. 1 second. Okay. So, looking into slide 10, child witness effects and impact. And so people forget that child witnesses are victims in addition to the first victim that we see themselves, the first victim being the primary victim. The primary victim is the one in a domestic violence relationship who is actually firsthand experiencing the abuse. Secondary victims is what we would call child witnesses, who may be witnessing the actual abuse but not receiving it necessarily themselves. So I put in another little statistic to show and emphasize the importance of looking at this side of things, and that is 3.2 million American children witness incidents of domestic violence annually. So these children are more at risk for poor school performance and difficulty in relationships, anxiety and depression, physical injury. There's a ton more. We're going to get into it, don't worry. And they might display inappropriate attitudes about violence as a means of resolving conflict and indicate a greater willingness to use violence themselves. So I'm going to stop there and discuss this one a little further before carrying on. Something that people don't, like, the kind of assumption we see people sometimes make is if some child sees an incident of domestic violence or they regularly live with it in their household, they might be more shy and withdrawn, which is true when it comes into trust and other factors, but sometimes people don't expect them to act out in this way that is mentioned. I think what they forget is that these kind of homes can normalize abuse or normalize violence. So, I'm sorry, I keep getting quiet because I'm trying to think of how to tell this story without breaking confidentiality. So basically, we've had a client in before, and she has 2 children. One of these children is an infant, so you can't quite see the effects as immediately or as drastically. And then the other child is a toddler. I want to say he was about 4. And this woman that we worked with, her husband was abusive to her physically, and he would bring the son in on it. So he would hold down the mom and ask the son to come up and hit her. Well, there were, I think, maybe 2 occasions where the son would hit her in the face when the father would hold her down and ask him to. The kid would laugh and smile, thinking it was kind of a game, and this obviously didn't hurt the mom too much physically because it was a 4-year-old, which, granted, I guess sometimes they can pack some heat. I have some cousins, I know. But it really hurts someone emotionally to sit through that, and it really is going to mess with the child's development going forward, having that normalized and kind of considered a part of playtime. And that's not obviously necessarily on the child's fault, because when you're so young, you're not going to be like, well, you might not necessarily be as much like, this is a red flag, this shouldn't be okay. This is when your morals and your ethics are developing still, and along with your behaviors and personality. And so none of this was the child's fault, but it's going to affect the person he is in the future. We haven't seen that yet, but this is just an example of why these effects can come out the way that they do. So they also experience abrupt school and home changes and parental separation that can have a significant effect on their development. Sometimes, they're taken away from homes, or they're temporarily taken from homes, live with a relative or in foster care or something of the sort, and then they may go back to their original parents again. It's very complex. Very unstable, causes lots of problems. Not that, them staying in their situation doesn't cause a lot of problems. So they might also act disobedient at home and at school, and they're typically more likely to have social competence problems. They may also fight, bully, lie, or cheat. That's not saying any kid that fights is probably witnessing domestic violence at home. It's just noticing, maybe these different points layered together, or a pattern of them that can kind of indicate something else. So, focusing on preschool age children, they may develop psychosomatic complaints such as headaches and abdominal pains. A lot of times when you are younger, you don't know necessarily how to express what is wrong, especially if it's something bothering you mentally, typically what you see kids want to do is find an actual answer for what's wrong. So they may say, oh, my stomach hurts. As a para, because I did para at a school before I came into the job I have now, it was really common that when a kid complained of their stomach, it wasn't typically, like, oh, I have a stomach ache today, I'm going to complain about it, and then, you'll hear about it in a couple months when I have another stomach ache. It was usually pretty regular. So every single day you would have the same child complaining of a bellyache. They can also display regressive behaviors, such as, I honestly don't know how to pronounce the first one. It's a word I am familiar with. I didn't think about it until now. I always read it. I've never had to say it before, but they can go into things like thumb sucking and sleep disturbances, what you typically expect in younger toddlers and infants. They might carry these behaviors with them from that point of their youth, or they may regress back to it. There can also be increased anxiety around strangers and behaviors such as whining, crying, and clinging. Again, things that you would typically associate with maybe being a little bit younger. It's not necessarily appropriate for their age or completely appropriate because, again, this is increased. Some amount of all of these things is expected, but an increase in it, a dramatic amount of it, that's, where the red flag should come up. So there may also be nighttime problems such as insomnia and parasomnias. They're going to be more frequent in this age group for children witnessing domestic violence in the home. Children of this age group who have witnessed domestic violence also may show signs of terror manifested by yelling, hiding, and stuttering. Speech impediment can be a big, I don't want to say a big thing with children who witness this. More than 50% of these infants cry excessively and have eating and sleeping problems. So infants already cry, it seems, excessively. They already have eating and sleeping problems. Well, not always with the eating, but they always have sleeping problems, it seems. And all of this is just maximized further when there's domestic violence in the home. Not to get too much into my own personal life, but I'm a child who grew up with, I was a child who grew up with violence in the home. And some of this may sound a little bit subjective, but when you look at it, a lot of it plays in here. So like when I was younger, with the psychosomatic part, where kids will complain of headaches and abdominal pain even if they don't have it, simply because something is bothering them and they are upset. When I was younger, I would find myself crying and I wouldn't exactly know why, simply because I was upset. And my mom would ask me why. And first off, my biological dad was out of my life in 2 weeks. When she asked me why, my go-to would be, oh, I miss my dad. I hardly even knew my dad, but that would be my go-to simply because I didn't like crying and not having a reason for it. That was my answer, and I accepted it, and I would give it to her, and that was not it. And then same thing with the speech impediment that I mentioned. I had 6 years of speech therapy as a child. And there's more that I could speak on, but like I said, just know some of these things may seem kind of normal, but it's just the increase in all of them. An unusual amount. Like, yes, they should be experiencing some of these things, but they should not be experiencing them to the degree that they are. These are big red flags. So, slide 11. I took more signs and I focused it in on age groups because, again, some things may be normal for one age group and not the other. So, looking at infants, their needs for attachment may be disrupted. They may have even poorer sleeping habits than most infants do, experience eating problems, or they may be at higher risk of physical injury. Most deaths when it comes to child abuse comes from infants. Most abused children are infants. And when I say infants, sometimes people kind of stretch it from, age 0 to like 3. I'm talking 0 to 1. Preschool age children. They may feel a lack of safety. They may have separation anxiety or anxiety around strangers. They may again have regressive behaviors going back to thumb sucking and things like that, or experience insomnias and parasomnias. That is another thing I can attest to. So then looking at school-age children, they may self-blame, they may have somatic complaints, aggressive behaviors, or regressive behaviors. Again, this can be bullying, lying, and cheating for aggressive, and then I don't know if I said aggressive or regressive, but that one, aggressive. And then regressive behavior can just be behavior that seems too young for them. This can be bedwetting and things of the sort, in addition to that thumb sucking. Adolescence, school truancy, delinquency, substance abuse, early sexual activity. These are typically things we see. I think that touches on all of that enough. Going into slide 12. What can we do for child witnesses? So first off, you can offer safety planning. Not you personally, sorry, general you. But, so safety planning was one of the things I'd put on our services that we offer all individuals in our communities. Safety planning for children, I'm not saying, sit them down and have the whole discussion between just you and the child. But if you, again, I keep using a general you. I know I'm not referring to you specifically. I'm still speaking with my coworkers. But so, say if I were working with a client and they had kids and they expressed that, some of this violence has taken place in front of their kids have not been physically hurt themselves, because then again I would have to make a report, but the kids have not experienced this physical harm themselves, they've just witnessed it. So I may offer the parent some safety planning, and I would offer that the kids can come in with her or him, whoever, sorry, I just speak as to what I'm used to seeing in our offices. Again, we work with anyone. I would work with the parent on safety planning, but see if the children would maybe want to be in the room for that. So, it might offer them some assurance saying, if this were to happen again, this is where we're going. Or, yes, we're about to leave this situation, this is how we're going to do it. Having more knowledge and information and knowing what to expect, depending on age, because again, I don't know why I keep saying again, I haven't mentioned this, but because, some children might not have the cognitive ability to understand what we're discussing, but more so for this middle-aged group of children, this older age group of children, them hearing for sure what's going to happen and knowing that they have a plan and something they can do can be very assuring. To know, mom or dad have thought about this, and this is what we're going to do if it happens again, or if there's even a worry that it might happen, these are the steps we're going to take, this is what we need, this is where we need to go, this is what we need to grab. And that can be more assuring. So I'm trying to hold back a hiccup. So we can also refer them to places like the Child Advocacy Center. Well, we can't personally refer them. Law enforcement has to. But we can speak with law enforcement and get them a referral to the Child Advocacy Center and other places that work with the children more one-on-one. Also refer to counseling services. We have really good counseling services in the area that we can always point children and adults even to, but some counselors specialize with the youth. And that can be pretty helpful. I apologize for how many times I'm saying I was in speech in high school. I know better. We also what you need to do with children is make it clear that there is mandatory reporting. If any if any harm, I should say, were to come on these children, or if they were to experience any neglect, obviously you would use different wording. We have to report that. Everyone in Nebraska is a mandatory reporter. I'm not saying tell the kids, hey, if you tell me any of this, I'm going to call the cops and your parents is going to go to jail, or whoever in the household is going to go to jail. But these children, their trust is already so shaky, and you don't want to make it worse by listening to them, making them feel as though you are here for them, and then reporting. Everything needs to be open with the children. Communication needs to be very clear. So I would make it clear to a child, yes, I can talk to you about all of these concerns you have and everything that's happened to you, but know that this is what I'm going to have to do, and this is what is going to come of it, so that they know what to expect. A lot of kids, their worry is, I don't want so and so to go to jail and for it all to be my fault. Oh, and I'm never going to see them again. They're going to be locked away for forever. Explaining to the kids, like this isn't necessarily the case. This is going to help prevent things from happening anymore. And just, again, keeping that line of communication clear. You want to be transparent with them. You don't want to ruin the trust that you're trying to build because the kids already have such shaky trust. The metaphor I like to use is it's kind of like those like wooden paneled bridges. So if you were walking across one and it had little like side chains to hold on to, you might not be hesitant crossing it. You might just walk across the bridge. It's any other bridge. But for these kids, it's almost as though one of those panels have fallen out from under them before. So now every time they go over this bridge again, they're going to test the wood before stepping on it. That's kind of how the relationship's going to go with them. I don't remember if I've been saying the slide numbers, but looking at slide 13, what do child witnesses need? So they need to be believed. They need to know that they did nothing wrong. Sometimes kids feel at fault, or they're made to feel at fault. Sometimes it's a belief they take on of their own, and sometimes it's one they are led to have. They need to know that they are safe. They need to know that whoever else in the household who may be vulnerable or subject to abuse is also safe. And they need to build trust. I don't mean that they need to build our trust. They should just be trusted. They need for us to build trust with them. And this again speaks to that metaphor I just touched on. They also need respect. Sometimes people leave that part out with children. It doesn't matter how old they are. Respect is basic human decency, and they need it just as much as anyone else. Going back to be believed, because I feel like I didn't touch on that enough. So a lot of kids, feel like this is happening in my household. If this other person isn't doing anything about it and they are an adult, then what am I going to say about it that someone's going to believe? Or maybe it's normalized. There's nothing to say or report about it. There's no reason to talk to anyone, and so on. We need to validate all of their feelings that something is wrong. They need to do something about it. We can help do something about it. We can help keep it from happening again. Slide 14 is about the ACE questionnaire. I don't know if any of you have heard about this or touched on it in class or not, but there is this questionnaire made up, and it touches on childhood trauma and how experiencing that can affect individuals on a more long-term scale. So basically what it says is that being exposed to adverse experiences growing up can result in higher risk for the behaviors, mental, physical, and psychological health issues listed. And that's the ones I have on the image next to it in this slide. For behaviors, that's lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, and missed work. I don't want to say, drug use and alcoholism necessarily just as a behavior, because I do want to point out that addictions are very much so a medical problem. It's an illness, but that is how they have it classified. It's not to say it's not any less severe. Just quick disclaimer on that. And then physical and mental. That's severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. So some of these are more direct and in your face than others. Obviously, if you experience some physical trauma in your childhood, you are more at risk for broken bones in that time. But it can also result in riskier activity in your behaviors later on in life that may lead to these broken bones. And then the stress and everything else you experience with that trauma can lead to the more long-term underlying ones you wouldn't usually expect, like the heart disease, COPD, stroke, things like that. Sorry, my voice is going. So the ACE questionnaire is a survey that focuses on these childhood experiences of abuse and neglect. Basically, the higher an ACE score, the more at risk the individual is for the terms listed above. To give you some context, my score is an 8. I'll touch on what that means in a second, so I know that sounds random, just wait. I also have the link on this slide, so you can go ahead and take the questionnaire and see your ACE score if you would like. A high ACE score, again, means that you are more vulnerable and at risk for these sort of things. But then on our last slide, we touch on the resiliency questionnaire. So high resiliency scores can lower the previous risk despite having a high ACE score, or they can at least minimize the risk. Basically what we're saying is resiliency can outweigh all of these negative traumas that children may have experienced before. So a child may not necessarily suffer from drug addiction later on in their life, or lack of physical activity, or some of the other ones that we had discussed. They might not necessarily struggle as much with their mental health or anything else of the sort, to some degree, if they have high enough resiliency. Resiliency is primarily a result of having caring and supportive relationships within and outside the family. So relationships creating love and trust provide role models and offer encouragement or reassurance, and they increase resilience. So looking at this, you may have a high ACE score. You may have been exposed to a lot of trauma as a child, but if you have these positive relationships, you have love, trust, you've received encouragement, reassurance, you have support systems, you aren't going to get as much of a backlash from that trauma because you are more resilient and can bounce back a little bit easier. Whereas someone who has no support system, someone who may not have any role models, any encouragement or love or support, it's going to be harder for them to bounce back because they don't have anywhere to turn to and they're doing it all on their own. Things that attribute to resiliency are, again, sorry, my voice is leaving, are the capacity to make realistic plans and take steps to carry them out, positive view of yourself and confidence in your strengths and abilities, capacity to manage strong feelings and impulses, or skills in communication and problem solving. You don't have to have all of these to be resilient. Again, it's just like the other questionnaire. You can have a certain level of resiliency and a certain level of all your ACE scores. I also put this link in case anyone wanted to look at their own resiliency score. So the more resilient you are, the more likely you are to bounce back from this trauma. So my resiliency score, I don't remember this one exactly, but I had a fairly high resiliency score. And so a big reason as to why I suffered all that trauma, and I'm not necessarily as at risk for these behaviors in physical and mental health as it seems like I maybe should have been, is because I also had a high resiliency score. If you were to have a high ACE score and a low resiliency score, then you are way more at risk for all of these behaviors and physical and mental health problems, and you may struggle with them more throughout your life. Whereas if you have a low ACE score and a high resiliency score, then you are probably not at risk for any of these other than what's already just, apparent genetically and so on. That's not saying that because none of this is concrete. It's not saying if you have a low ACE score and you have high resiliency, you're never going to break a bone. You're never going to have a stroke. You're still at risk for these things. That's what we're talking about here is risk. Risk is never 100% calculated. It fluctuates. And sometimes, it doesn't follow rules. So you might have low ACE score and a high resiliency, and you might still encounter some of these. You might have a high ACE score, and you might not encounter some of these. This is just what studies have shown and what we're noticing, and so it's an interesting guideline to look at. But with all of that being said, I have covered everything I've wanted to within about 50 minutes, and that is the time that your professor gave me. So thank you, Dr. Citron, for letting me make this video since I've been unable to come and speak with your class and your class has been unable to convene in person. If anyone has any questions, Dr. Citron should have my contact information, or if anything else comes up and you need me, feel free to reach out. Project Response is here for anyone struggling. Like I said, we may work primarily with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and all of those other issues that can incorporate those. But we also help out our community when it comes to outreach, prevention planning, education, and just the basic needs. So again, personal care items, food, clothing vouchers, we're always here. Thank you.